We can argue that Clemson is the best team in the ACC. Some people would say Miami, but right now we've got an interesting little scenario where Clemson, Miami, Pitt, and SMU are all undefeated in the conference. Now, this is what I'm rooting for, Jason, just because I like chaos. Clemson wins out, Miami wins out, SMU wins out. None of them play each other. You got three undefeated teams. You go to some crazy tiebreaker, and I think it completely discredits a conference championship game. Well, not completely. It discredits it to a certain extent when you leave out a team that went undefeated in the conference out of a conference championship game. Now, is that likely to happen? No. But still, Clemson has some interesting games coming up here. You got the Louisville game. They're fun to watch. They're capable. Not a great team. Bad defense. But again, quarterback, running backs, wide receivers are really good. Then you've got this Virginia Tech game that was announced as a night game at Lane Stadium, one of the more difficult places to play in college football. And what I like about this as well is, of course, these two teams have been separated by divisions for years and years and years. So they only play once every 6 or 7 years. And then obviously, so Clemson only comes to Blacksburg 1 out of 14 years. Now that's been wiped out by the new scheduling system, but that's the way it's been there. And then there's a date against Pitt, who's undefeated right now at 7-0. So a lot of big games on the horizon.
Yeah, there are definitely multiple, potential pitfalls for this Clemson team over this, stretch of final 5 games here in November. And it starts with this Louisville one this week. You get through that, then you got to go back-to-back road games on Virginia Tech, Pitt, and Clemson's only played up there at Pitt one time and lost when they went up there. Not that I'm one of those believers that thinks that has any bearing on what happens this year, but that Pitt secondary is good. I'm interested in I'm looking forward to seeing Clemson's wideouts matched up against those DBs. They've been pretty good this year. Looking at the schedule of those 3 teams, Clemson, Pitt, Clemson, SMU, and Miami, I think Clemson might have the toughest slate of the 3. SMU and Pitt have to play each other, so one of those are going to knock the other out. It would be interesting to see those 3 teams finish unbeaten. As it stood right now, I think SMU might be the odd man looking out based on the tiebreaker because it kind of goes by ACC opponents win percentage, but it would definitely be a knock on the tiebreaker system to see one of those unbeatens get left out and not even be able to play for a conference championship. Not a likelihood of that happening. Probably lies somewhere between slim and none. These things tend to work themselves out, and I kind of see it playing out that way again this year. But for me, the bigger thing is, can the ACC get 2 teams in the playoff? I've long said if I'm an ACC team, I'm not holding my breath waiting on an at-large bid. But it looks like this year that in the very first year of the expanded playoff, man, maybe an ACC team can play their way into an at-large bid.
So it appears that there's a couple different routes for the ACC to set themselves up fairly well. And I think one would be Clemson and Miami go to the ACC championship game. Clemson's already lost a game. Miami shows up undefeated. Clemson wins the game. They obviously go automatically. Miami's sitting there at 12-1. They lose an ACC championship game by a field goal, let's say. SMU, they go undefeated the rest of the way. As you mentioned, if this is a 3-way tie, they get left out because they've got the worst schedule of the 3. But you leave out a team that went 11-1, went undefeated in their conference, and lost by 3 points to a BYU team that's undefeated right now and ranked in the top 10 in the country.
Yeah, and we're talking about an SMU team that's still not getting a lot of respect from the pollsters. If they can win again this weekend, and I'd be anxious to see where they stand in the first, college football playoff rankings. Clemson not getting a ton of respect either. Now, you're on a bye week. You drop 2 spots in the AP. Don't make a lot of sense to me, but those polls are basically meaningless right now. I'll be very interested to see if SMU wins again this week. Same thing for Pitt. Where they're at in the first set of college football playoff rankings when those things come out next week, because neither one of those teams are getting a whole lot of love in the AP or the coaches polls, but it definitely makes for some intriguing storylines as we go down the final stretch of the season, 4 teams in the conference that are unbeaten right now. Anyways, possibly you could get to the end of it and 3 be unbeaten. It would definitely be crazy, and if you get to that scenario where if they all 3 finish unbeaten, SMU gets left out of the ACC championship game. Say Miami beats Clemson, that would eliminate Clemson. They're not getting in with 2 losses. Does SMU get one of those at-large bids? Can they climb up enough in the polls to secure one of those spots? That'd be one of those things that I will be very interested to see how it plays out if, the right dominoes fall into place for them.
Again, if they're sitting there 11-1 and they just beat Pitt and whomever else is on their schedule, I guess their best wins would be Louisville, Pitt come to mind. And they're sitting there at 11-1 and they're 1 loss, especially if BYU goes on and wins the Big 12. BYU's sitting here at 8-0. Can you imagine if BYU goes undefeated and that's SMU's only loss by 3 points to BYU and they're 11-1?
Yeah,
that leaves them out of the playoff.
Matter of fact, it's Pitt and SMU plays this weekend at SMU. And then after that, SMU's got Boston College at home. They go on the road to play Virginia, and they finish up at home versus Cal. So that, you get by that Pitt game, that's a very manageable slate there. They can very easily run the table. Got to get by Pitt this weekend. That'll be the big one for them. But they did everything they could to lose that game against Duke the other night. It's a travesty that Duke did. They tried to give Duke a gift, and Duke just didn't want it. But that's a pretty dangerous quarterback SMU's got. I think it speaks. I think it says a lot for, the team Rhett Lashley's building there and the cultures he's built, or the culture that he's built there, that they can play, that far off from their best game, make that many mistakes, and still survive and win.
And the ACC doesn't even have to pay them $1 for any of this. They're playing for free.
They are playing for free. They are one of the few schools in these days that can afford to do that.
They just want to play big time football, so whatever it takes.
I don't know how. I know one of the guys that I work with. He had SMU a little. I can't remember if I think he picked them to finish 4th in the ACC, but there's not many people that picked them to finish that high. Did you?
I'll have to go back to my picks, but I picked them 8-4 overall. I think I had them either 6-2 or 5-3 in the conference. I had them pretty close to the.
They didn't get a ton of love, for their first season in the ACC from a lot of people, man. SMU and Pitt both have been, one of the biggest surprises in college football, to be where they are at this point in the season.
No doubt. And again, I'm a guy that roots for chaos. So I always love to see the log jam, want to see the chaos, want to see the most difficult situations. And this is what I predicted in the offseason. I didn't know where it was going to happen, Jason, but I said we got 4 conferences, and these conferences have become so big that you can only play so many teams in the conference. Therefore, it increases the chances that you have multiple teams tied for first place, tied for second place, tied for both, and you create log jams, and then you got to go to the tiebreakers that in at least one of these conferences, and I bet it's going to be multiple, you're going to have some crazy tiebreaker that's going to have to be applied.
You got a logjam at the top of the SEC right now, a logjam at the top of the ACC, and you're absolutely right. The more teams you add, they're not facing off against one another because you only got so many games to spread it around. It definitely creates a mess, and I think we're heading towards that, at least in one of these conferences, like you say.
Good stuff from Jason Priester. Get the deep dive there at the Clemson Insider with Jason. You see the X handle for both he and the Clemson Insider. Jason, always appreciated. Good to see you. Enjoy the game on Saturday.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me, Mark.